Well, thanks everyone for coming along. I'm glad you could make it. And I'm really happy to have Barry here today. Barry has wide international experience in all areas of the media and the entertainment industries. And he's a well-known radio and TV presenter, and he spent many years with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and various commercial radio and TV stations. And his profile embraces news and sports anchoring and lifestyle shows and current affairs and talkback radio. And he produces and hosts the internet radio program radiooutthere.com for a worldwide audience. Now, curiously, Barry is also an astrologer and a psychic and medium, and he studied at the well-known Arthur Findlay College in the UK. And in 2012, he also received the Hall of Fame Award by the Australian Psychics Association. And if you are lucky enough to own a Jaguar or a Land Rover, you may also be hearing his voice guiding you on your navigating system. That's quite a quite a collection of things that you've done, Barry. So Barry's new book, Past Lives Unveiled, is a comprehensive look at the why of reincarnation, covering topics such as the purpose of our soul families, the physical impacts from the past, the psychic cords that bind us, and why children have a better memory of past lives. It includes numerous case studies and absorbing accounts of the author's own past lives in ancient Greece and the US at the time of the Civil War, as well as the intriguing hypnotic regressions of two sisters by eminent psychologist, author and past life expert, Dr. Michael Newton. So today, Barry's very timely presentation addresses the relevance and importance of our past lives in today's changing world. So Barry, thanks for joining our group today. I'm so glad you could come along. And I think this is such an important topic for where we are right now in our current pandemic situation, where we go from here and the unfolding bigger story. So take it away.
Great. Thanks a lot, Cheryl. And thanks everybody for joining us. Yeah, look, we're not going to talk about the current world situation because there's been enough. Every time you turn the radio on, TV on, there's enough pandemic news out there. But I will say something here about astrology before we start off. I gave a talk earlier on this year at the Cosmic Consciousness Conference in Uluru, talking about something that was happening on that day that I gave the talk, the 12th of January, and a very, very quick reference to this. It was two planets, Saturn and Pluto, who came together in the sky. We call that a conjunction, when two planets meet at exactly the same degree. And it was in the constellation of Capricorn. Now, basically, I'm not going to go and give you the whole lecture here, just a quick scene setting bit here. Saturn represents like the establishment. It represents things like governments, banking institutions, the finance, the health, everything on a worldwide scale and also a personal scale. So it's us, our establishment within us, who we are. And the planet Pluto represents transformation. So transformation, as opposed to just change, is essentially the death of the old for the birth of the new. So that was the thing that was being set up, and it was being set up as the two planets very slowly came together over the preceding months. This is actually when this situation started to happen in China. So all of this was leading up to the fact, and then on January the 12th, as we know, after that, things started to explode. But basically, this is a year of change. And I don't have to tell you what's going on in the world. Huge, massive, unprecedented changes. Well, when the last time these two planets came together was in 1518, and it was the precursor to the Reformation. And when it was in, these two planets came together in Capricorn, 502 years ago. Now, the Reformation was when Martin Luther tacked all those things onto the cathedral. And then, of course, the Protestants broke away from the Catholic, it was a huge upset in the balance of things, because it was church and state in those days was all there was. So it had a fantastic impact on the Western world. So now we're having a look at something that is having as big an impact, but it's happening on the whole world this time. So 502 years later, we can look at massive change, and that's exactly what we're doing. Now, this is not only world change, it's personal, as I said before. So that's why the reference to the past as to how we can make this work for ourselves, what we can learn is so important, because so many people now are finding opportunities. They've gone through all the mumbling and grumbling and complaining about having to stay at home, and suddenly people are saying, hang on, I can look at changing my life. I can look at myself. I can think, why? I prefer actually staying at home. And there are people now realizing that their life that they had before was not all that it could be. So these sort of things, I believe the universe sends things along to us, and we get whatever we can deal with. As a global community, yeah, we have to deal with this. But what we can do is to look within as individuals and see what we need to look at to make the changes to fit in with the, I guess, the cosmic changes that are happening right across our planet at this present time. And of course, this is going to keep on going all through 2020. In fact, it looks like it, from all indications astrologically and numerologically, that it's probably going to stay until about the end of the year. We could have a little breakthrough in June, but it could still stay there. So stay there right through the end of the year. Suddenly suddenly saw myself coming up full screen. I gave myself a shock. So basically, what I set the scene there, so to just keep in mind about the change that is happening in all of us, whether we like it or not. Now, one of the best things to do is to have a look at the past, because where we are right now is the product of everything that's happened to us in the past, not only this lifetime, but obviously in past lives. Now, I know you've had other speakers talk to you, and I'm pretty sure you're all au fait with the fact that we bring karma back from one lifetime to the next. Now, I'm presuming that everybody who's with us today actually has their own thoughts, but positive ones, the fact that we lead more than one life. And the whole concept, of course, of the afterlife is that this is just a body that we're inhabiting. We are an ongoing life form, which is energy, and we go from lifetime to lifetime. So what we do in each lifetime is an accumulation of what we need to come back to and have a look at from our past lives, things that are left over, mistakes that we've made that maybe need to be corrected, working with people. We've talked about soul families, and we do travel with certain people from lifetime to lifetime. And we do have soul families that we go back to, close soul families in the afterlife. And also we have extended soul families. And possibly you've done a bit of research on this yourself, but it's certainly there. And quite often we do travel with people who may well have been our brothers, sisters, colleagues, mothers, fathers, whoever in previous lifetimes, and we sort of come back. It's like the cast of a repertory theatre company where you're playing different roles in every different production. And that's, in a nutshell, what happens with past lives. But of course, it's down to the individual, because life is all about the growth of the soul. That's what we come back each time for, to grow our soul, have as many experiences as we need to have on the earthly plane and on other worlds, because yes, we do live on other worlds, and just about everybody who's here today has had a life on another world, maybe more than one life. More about that later. So the book that I wrote and had released last year, Past Lives Unveiled, is the third part of a trilogy. It started off in 2009 when I wrote a book called Afterlife. And Afterlife has gone on to had a worldwide acceptance. In fact, it's the bestseller. I'm not patting myself on the head, but yes, I am. But it's basically because I think the world needed to find out what's going on. And I was just one of many. And I was told from the other side that, yes, you have to get out there and join the band of people who are around the world in many different ways, whether they're writing books or running programs or whatever. If just spreading the word that get the fear out of the afterlife. So the trilogy for me was Afterlife, followed by No Goodbyes in 2014. Afterlife came out in 2011, by the way, and it's still selling all around the world. It's quite amazing. And then the third part is Past Lives. So let's talk about past lives. As I said before, our past lives teach us about ourselves, what we need to know, what we can come up with from the past, the lessons we can learn, how we can grow in this lifetime, so we don't have to come back and repeat it next time around or the lifetime after that. We need to keep growing. And that's exactly what the purpose of past lives research is. Now, I've always talked about the fact that past life research and then going to have a past life consultation, the best thing to do that is through hypnotherapy. And I've been trained in this area now, so I've been doing quite a lot of past life therapy with people. And the whole thing is that it's not a Hollywood time trip. It's not going down the time tunnel and saying, oh, yes, I was on the barge there with Cleopatra, or yes, I was one of Julius Caesar's troops or enemies or whatever. It's about me, what I have done, what I have learned, and what I can now embrace in this particular lifetime. So it's a serious look at who we are. And when we do a past life regression, then we're looking for whatever it is in that lifetime that we're coming back to explain. And I'm going to go into that a little bit because I had some amazing regressions myself, which I've talked about in my book, Past Lives Unveiled. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that very soon. But let me just have a little look here. I've made some notes. Oh, yes. Where does all this information come from? Well, for a start, we don't bring all of our soul energies back into each lifetime. Now, that may seem strange, but nobody ever brings 100% back. There's always a percentage of our soul energy that stays on the other side. Now, this is commonly referred to as our higher self. So there's always part of us back in the world of spirit that we can access, we can communicate with our higher selves, and, and we can find out what we need to know. I've learned how to communicate with my higher self and come up with all sorts of amazing things. I quite often work with pendulums and tune into my higher self and ask certain questions and get whether I want to consult. I'm consulting myself. But the higher self knows exactly why we have come back in each lifetime. The higher self knows what we're going through, whether we're making the right decisions or whatever. So if you're in doubt and you can learn how to get in touch with your higher self, then that is tremendously important and very, very beneficial. The way I do it is, I'll sit up here a bit, I put my hands over my heart because that's where the soul connects with the human body at the heart level. We talk about heart and soul. That is where the soul connects. Now, I've been told this on numerous occasions from my contacts in the world of spirit. So if you want to get in touch with your higher self, I find that by crossing my hands over my heart and tuning in and hearing and feeling that heartbeat, then going into a meditation, then I can, well, it's the same kind of connection that I make if I'm going to be doing any psychic work, connecting with my guides, connecting with myself. So I do that and I'm able to, I've even learned recently how to bring healing down via the higher self, down through the crown chakra and into heal various parts of the body. And this is something that I've been working on embracing. Anyway, back to past lives. Okay, so where does the information come from apart from the past life for the higher self? Then it's the subconscious. The mind is not our consciousness. Science would have us believe that the mind is consciousness. That's what science says. But we all know that consciousness is actually the soul. Now, when we look at the whole structure of consciousness, we can look at it like an iceberg. Now, an iceberg comes out of the ocean, and the top half of it here is above the ocean, above the eye level, and then right down there is beneath the surface. Now, that top part, the bit that sticks out, that is the conscious mind, but that only represents about 5 to 10% of our mind and our it's basically our known memory, and that's what we work with. But it's only 5 to 10% of what we're working with our mind. When we go beneath the surface, right down into that iceberg, we go into the subconscious at the very top there. Now, the subconscious has various strata to it. The subconscious comprises forgotten memories, hidden memories, which include past lives. Also, I've got to put the glasses on here to read my own writing. There's an immortal memory and also a collective memory of all humankind. Now, all this is in our subconscious. It's there. And there's no linear time in our subconscious. So that's why we can travel back and we can look and visualize and come up with, in our regressions, we can go into our past lives because we are accessing our own subconscious because it is not third dimensional. There is no linear time there. Then we go right down deep and we come into the superconscious. and it's a real storehouse of energy. So that's basically where it's going. I learned all of that through Peter Smith, who was the international president of the Michael Newton Institute. Pete and I have been working together for quite some time now. And Pete wrote the foreword to my book, the introduction, and worked with me. He regressed me into various lives, a couple on this planet and one on another planet. And I've included those in the book. Now, Peter's fantastic. He has had a business called Hypnoenergetics, where he has worked as a past life therapist. He also was running the Life Between Lives therapy in Australia for the Newton Institute. He's given up both of those now because he's concentrating on quantum consciousness, which is, well, we're getting down into some pretty deep stuff here. Maybe that's the occasion. Maybe you should get Pete on to have a little talk to you one Sunday. Anyway, Pete did a whole lot of regressions with me, and the way he does it is absolutely superb. And I'll tell you the first one that he did with me when I was living in Mullumbimby I was writing this back in 2016, 2017, this particular book. And Pete came on stage and regressed me into a past life where it was ancient Greece. And I came up with the person I was in that particular lifetime, turned out to be a young Greek philosopher, not long out of the school of philosophy. And he was with one of the Plato schools. Plato was long since gone by that time, but there was a whole series of philosophic schools under the tutelage of people who had done the Plato courses. And I graduated from that, but I was a very young philosopher. And the master of that academy, they were called academies, the master of that academy happened to be friends with the Roman governor, because Greece at the time was under domination and occupation by Rome. And the glory days of Greece had long gone. And at this particular stage, some of the villages outside of Athens were having a bit of an uprising, and the Romans were going to send some people down there to sort things out. So they wanted a translator, and they wanted somebody who knew the language, everything like that. So I was the one who was put forward by the master of the academy, because I could master the dialect in that particular area. So to cut a long story short, when I went into this, it was amazing. It was like I was suddenly in some kind of vision, some kind of dream state. And all of a sudden I saw myself and I was able to see I was wearing some kind of not a gown, but some kind of a garment. And I had a stick, and I was walking along with this particular stick, following the horse on which the Roman legionnaire was riding, because, poor old troops, they didn't ride, they walked. And I was down there with them, and they were sort of having a go at me, calling me Alexander the Great and all that sort of thing. And all good-natured soldier sort of fun. Anyway, we went into this particular village or were going into the village where the uprising was happening. There was all sorts of ferment going on. And before they got in there, the villagers and the hills around suddenly attacked the Romans for whatever reason, who knows. But anyway, they were throwing spears and arrows and whatever down there. Well, the Romans immediately put their shields up. They had something called a turturo in those days, which was like a tortoise. And they put a shell above with their shield, so they sheltered underneath that. And of course, after the rocks and the arrows and whatever were spent, the Romans then charged into the hills and they slaughtered everybody. So that was the end of the peaceful negotiation that we'd gone there to do. And I was pretty shattered because, okay, they were being silly, but they were still my countrymen. So I wasn't needed any more than that. We went back to Rome, and I was released from the Roman contract, as it were, and went back to live with my own people. And I was pretty disillusioned by the whole thing, and went back to live on my parents' farm. Now, Peter got me down into such an incredible area here that I've been able to write it in detail. I've just given you the shell of the story there, basically, the nutshell. So when Pete does a regression, we don't just go back and say, yes, we're doing all this. Okay, well, right, come back, and you've covered all that now. We've recorded that. Great. Now, Peter goes into the next level, and this is where the hypnoenergetics course that he pioneered And I actually been through it, so I know the detail that it goes into. Peter then connects you while you're still in a deep state of regression with your soul energy, your higher self, in other words. Now, this is where we go into a whole new area here. So let me quote, and we find out why we've gone back to that lifetime. If you don't mind, I'm going to read what I've written here because I can't remember it word for word. Peter's voice gently urged my soul to go deeper and across the lineage of every lifetime I've lived, and asked why it was important for me to see this particular lifetime. And my answer was to respect each other, to understand that because we have a way of life that is not necessarily the best or the only way of life, there are many cultures, many belief systems, histories, attitudes, behavioral patterns. There is not one common behavior pattern. That is what humanity is, a huge variety. And we need to learn to respect this. I need to learn to respect this. And Peter talked about then saying, help him to understand the message that needs to be offered to humanity as a result of the discovery that I have about myself in this lifetime. And my reply was, humanity is like a diamond. It has many facets, but each one of those facets makes up the whole. Humanity is not one single facet. It is just part of a network, a tapestry. And we're all part of each facet. There's a little bit of us represented everywhere. We have no right to look down on another part of the world, another race, any other belief system. We're all part of this, the diamond, and we may well have been an integral part of all these facets at some stage. And where we are at the moment is just one phase of our entire existence. Now, that to me, I'd be interested later on if we're doing a Q&A to get your reaction on that. That to me explained why I went back to that lifetime. Not just to say, oh yes, weren't the Romans terrible and I did the right thing and I was shattered and I probably deeply wounded and whatever. And that's why, you know, I studied Roman history at school or whatever. Yeah, that may well have had a little tiny bit, but the impact of what my soul had to tell me, that is what I can learn about myself. Now we're looking at the moment, when I wrote this book, we were looking at terrorism in the Middle East. We're looking at many different aspects of the human condition. And, you know, there's a lot of, whether we like it or not, there's a lot of racism looking down. And not that I ever think I'm racist, but sometimes we think, oh, why are those people doing that? Those terrorists, you know, they're dreadful people. Well, not that we necessarily need to learn to respect them, but maybe to understand what they are, what they're doing. And to be able to at least investigate that without just writing them off out of history. That's just one aspect, one possible aspect of it all. But this is why I wanted to go into this particular lifetime, because it's the facet bit got me, the facets of a diamond, and we know how many facets can be in a diamond and how many facets that we have in our life. So that was that particular lifetime. And there's a lot more. I went into it in a lot more detail in the book. And there were even some more discoveries that I made about that particular lifetime as well. But I won't go into the whole thing here because we've got a time limit. So that was my life as Kassos, and that was back BC, in the Roman occupation of Athens. The next life that he took me into came in the US in the Civil War. Now, I've found over the course of my other studies that I have had several lifetimes as a soldier, a warrior, in many different lives over many hundreds or even thousands of years. And this was another one. So I obviously had a lot to learn about war. And this particular lifetime that Pete took me back to, pardon me, I was one of two guys from the British Army, actually, who was sent over basically as secret agents to America because to be with the Confederates, because at that stage apparently England was still doing a lot of trading with the Confederate Army in the early stages of the Civil War, and they were keeping the shipping lines open with cotton and tobacco and various things like that. And at one stage England were even accused of backing the Confederates, but Anyway, that we won't go into history on this one. But anyway, William, my name was Jack in this lifetime, and we were both army officers that had been in the British occupation of India at that stage, and then we went back to England and were given this assignment to go over there because we were pretty well experienced. William, I think, was artillery, and I was another aspect of the military. Anyway, we went over there and we were liaising with the smugglers to get the cargoes backwards and forwards, smuggling them in from smuggling arms and all sorts of things in for the southern soldiers, and smuggling out the not only we had coffee, we had sugar, we had many different things, tobacco, of course. So they were all being, and cotton, and all being smuggled out to get back to England, which is still in again. And England were keeping an open mind at this particular stage. Anyway, as the war went on, then the smuggling was cut off. There was blockades, and we got cut off. So William and I were stuck in the Confederate Army areas, and we were unable to get messages back. So we were there. We just had to bear the consequences. Well, at one stage then, apparently General Lee, who was in charge of the army, knew about us, of course, because he'd been liaising with the British as well. He knew we were there, and he knew that we had some experience. And it turned out that he then forcibly put us into the army, because at that stage we had no more money from England that was there. We'd run out of everything. So we were drafted into the US Army to help. And in my story, I said, I'm not going to kill anybody. I refuse to shoot because it's not my war. Anyway, we're there as advisors, military advisors. Anyway, we got caught up with the various things. And in one of the famous battles, we both got killed. That's once again the story in a nutshell. So I'd always had a couple of fascinations in my lifetime, this lifetime, with the First World War. And I know my last life was, I died in the trenches in France in 1916 on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And in this lifetime, I'd always been fascinated by the US Civil War and read a bit about it, always known, for some reason, I'd always sort of had a thing about the South and, you know, abhor slavery and everything like that. But for some reason, there was always part of my heart that lent, if you like, towards the South. And once I had this incredible regression, that explained a little bit more. So I've got once again here the information that my soul said. And this particular stage, Pete went down and spoke to my soul and asked what my soul name was. And my higher self was not very happy about this. Said, no, you can call me anything you like. You can call me whatever, Jack, you can call me Barry, you can call me Brian, which is my name in my last life. But Pete stuck with it. And finally, my higher self said, well, I have a soul name, but it's very long and complicated. It starts with V, so you can call me V, as in V for victory or whatever. Anyway, so Peter asked V, I'm quoting here once again from the book, to look across the spectrum of his lives to ascertain what Barry needs to know at this point in his life. V immediately replied, loyalty, understanding, the need for humanity, the union of souls and peace, the hardest of all things. The key is love. And V made a reference then to a biblical saying that describes a peace that surpasses all understanding. And asked why I chose this particular lifetime to express my soul purpose, what the main influence was, V said communication. That was the immediate response. Barry was always meant to communicate information, to communicate in many different ways and modalities for different effects. And he went on to say the correlation of past lives, the word journey is much used on earth, too much, the progression of souls, the lessons, the ability to make mistakes and learn, the ability to accept others for who they are. Those are harsh lessons to learn. So once again, there's a correlation between some of those answers and the one as Kassos in Greece, accepting other people for who they are, which sometimes I'm quite free to admit, sometimes I do find it very difficult to accept people for who they are or what they are. Part of my astrology says I don't accept fools gladly. Okay, all right, so I'm learning that lesson harshly in some ways. But anyway, so that was the lesson there. Now, I did find out that later on, that when I died in the trenches in World War One, that was the end of all the lives that I've had to have as a soldier. I've learned my lessons. I've learned that taking life, human life, is such a waste. War is a futility, and it's just an appalling situation. So I've, over many lifetimes, learned that lesson, but it's obviously taken a long time to learn it. But I've put that behind me now, and communication is the message. Now, it sounds funny when you're quoting it here, but all of this, Pete recorded all of this. And when I listen back to some of these recordings, where did that come from? I don't remember feeling or saying or thinking or anything like that. So when you go down into this very deep regression, you're accessing that deep part of the subconscious that I talked about before with the iceberg. And the information that's stored there, the past life memories, come out in a relevant way to whatever the situation is that you're exploring at the time. So it's quite a fascinating experience to be regressed like this. So there are so many aspects I can talk about here that, we've all seen many, many references to children being regressed and coming up with some amazing past life memories. I go into that in the book. I won't go into it here this afternoon because we are, as I said, on a bit of a time limit. But I do go into a whole lot of research with people like Professor Ian Stevenson, who did an amazing amount of research into what children express. And apparently, most children come back with some kind of past life information, and which tends to start to fade after about 6 or 7 years. Many astrologers will tell you that is the first Saturn quarter of our lifetime. And by the time we reach 7, we're starting to move beyond and become a little bit more independent. So it's not surprising. But if we know of children that do have these memories and want to talk about them or share them in some way or refer to them, then we should never discourage them. It's the same as talking about my imaginary friend. Never discourage them, because as soon as that discouragement is there, the children think, oh, well, okay, I must be imagining it. So they walk away from it. But if it's encouraged, then who knows what amazing information can come out, and has come out in many different books over the years. As I said, Professor Ian Stevenson was definitely an expert in this, and there's a couple of his books around if you're interested in getting hold of them at some stage. Now, a couple of other cases that I came up with in studying what we can look forward to from our past lives and the various anomalies that may crop up. One of the most interesting was a doctor, a world famous doctor, who possibly many of you will know. His name is Dr. Norm Shealy. Now, Norm Shealy is a former neurosurgeon. Norm was the doctor who worked with Carolyn Mace as her medical referee there. So Caroline would tune in to health reasons for people or health problems and refer them over to Norm, who would then work with them medically from there on. Norm is an amazing man. Norm is now, he would be 88 this year, and he's still going. He has had an amazing track record as a medico, not only a neurosurgeon in the early days. He also went on, he was the person who invented the TENS machine, the pain management machine, and many other aspects of life. He's gone through the whole area of mainstream medicine, came out the other side, suddenly realized there's a heck of a lot more to medicine and health than just pure mainstream science. Now runs a wellness center in Missouri and in the United States, and he does some incredible work. As for past lives, I interviewed Norm on my program, Radio Out There, a couple of years ago. And a wonderful man, most delightful man. And he tells the story, which I've told the story in my book, Past Lives Unveiled again, that as somebody who no way was he thinking about past lives, had never gone into any of this whole situation. He was at a medical conference, medical talk, and this guy was droning on and on and on. He was thinking, oh God, this is so boring. Anyway, all of a sudden, the lecturer talked about a 19th century doctor by the name of John Elliotson. And Norm sort of sat up bolt upright in his chair, and he had this he told me, an icy feeling that went down the spine. You know, maybe we've all had that chilled feeling. Oh, what was that? We're talking about shivers going down the spine. Well, Norm describes it as an icy blast down his back, down the spine. And he suddenly started listening to in depth to what this guy was talking about with this John Elliotson. And after a couple of minutes, he was hit with this amazing thought, John Elliotson, that was me. I'm John Elliotson. Now, here's a man who had never investigated, never had any thoughts or anything about past lives, suddenly realized that a 19th century doctor was him. So afterwards, he thought, I've got to follow this through. So he went over to the United Kingdom to explore what was happening and who this Elliotson was. He wanted to find out what was happening to him and why he was having this icy blast, etc., etc. So anyway, he got over to England, and he was going to, from the airport, got this taxi and was going to go to the British Medical Institute, I think it was. Anyway, halfway there, he suddenly said, don't turn right here, turn left. And the cab driver said, oh, what? So they turned left, and Norm said, okay, stop outside this building. All this is just coming into him intuitively, a neurosurgeon. And he got out of the cab, walked into the building, found it was where John Elliotson had his surgery in the 19th century. And then he started to find out a little bit more as he explored about John Elliotson. Now, I'm going to show, not just at the moment, Cheryl, but we're going to put a picture up in a few minutes' time to show you exactly what I'm talking about here. The more he went on to explore about John Elliotson, the more he uncovered, the more he realized that there was an incredible correlation between him and Elliotson. One of them that stands out for me was Elliotson was a rebel. Elliotson at one stage got into trouble with the British medical authorities because he challenged their beliefs. He wasn't prepared to sit back like doctors are these days and be told what to think by the medical establishment, by the pharmaceutical organizations or whatever. He was a rebel. So because he was a rebel, he was not struck off, but he was sort of alienated. He was given the icy treatment by the authorities. But at one stage, he was asked to give a talk at the annual Harveyan conference, the annual Harveyan talk it's called, because of his credentials. So reluctantly, they asked him to give this talk. So he turned up to this conference, and they were expecting the full, boring old medical conference. So what did he do? He talked about, quote, the hypocrisy of science in accepting new thoughts. Don't you love it? The hypocrisy of science in accepting new thoughts. And he went on and gave this whole talk, of course, upset quite a few people, because he was the person who actually introduced stethoscopes into Britain. He also introduced mesmerism, an earlier form of hypnotism, and that was the reason why he got into so much trouble. But he was the person who did all of this. And he introduced also not pain-killing drugs. He introduced stimulants, drugs, so that people could deal with their pain. And of course, the scientists didn't want to do that because the science and medical department, that's too radical, far too radical. Anyway, Norm then revealed to me that before all of this happened, before we'd even heard of John Elliotson in this lifetime, Norm had written a novel, which he had published anonymously, a novel based on, quote, the hypocrisy of medicine in accepting new ideas. Don't you love it? He unwittingly used material from his lifetime as John Elliotson in this novel. So it came to him from his subconscious. He didn't use his name of Dr. Norm Shealy, but he put out there, isn't that wonderful? The hypocrisy of medicine in accepting new ideas. What did our friend John Elliotson? The hypocrisy of science in accepting new thoughts. Coincidence? Don't think so. Anyway, Norm then was totally convinced, of course, that he was Dr. John Elliotson, and has gone on to prove other things. In this lifetime, he has moved away from the drugs that were being used, and he's gone into pain management. So he's reversed a couple of things that he did as John Elliotson. He came back and he corrected a few of the mistakes that he'd made. I've written it all in detail in the book. But so it was, here is Norm Shealy, neurosurgeon, an icon of the medical establishment, accepting past lives, doing all these things, and then embracing a whole new concept. Isn't that brilliant? So once he's accepted that, we then turned up a picture of John Elliotson and Norm Shealy. So Cheryl, if you can put that up on the screen now, we can.
I will.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks very much. That would be really great. So why don't we just get in here? But Norm is the most delightful, and here he is. Have a look. There is Elliotson on the left. On the right-hand side is Norm Shealy at about the same age. Now, can you tell me that these guys are, I mean, look at them, they could be brothers. Well, continuing on one lifetime from the other to pick up where he left off as Elliotson and to remedy some of the mistakes that he made that he wanted to bring up from the 19th into the 20th century. So when you look at those two images, now I've put these images in the book, by the way, it's the only images I've got in the Past Lives Unveiled, and they're there. And the more I look at it, the more I can accept that Norm Shealy was John Elliotson. Thanks, Cheryl. Most amazing man, and he's worked with Carolyn Mace for quite a few years. In fact, they gave up working together. They moved on a few years ago, but then about 12 or 18 months ago, they got together for another great big conference, and everybody was absolutely delighted. It's a pity they can't do it all. But Norm's, in his late 80s now, so it's a bit difficult for him to do a lot more. So he basically stays, a lot of outside work, so he basically stays on his ranch in Missouri, and people come to him. It's a wellness center there. But there are a couple of other cases where people have picked up from previous lives, or they've tuned into other lives, and they've seen and they've brought some of their abilities back. I mean, when you look at people like Mozart, for instance, Mozart was a child genius. He was composing at the age of 5. He was giving concerts around Europe at the age of 5 and 6 in royal palaces and whatever. I mean, you don't come back and have that kind of ability just sort of appear out of nowhere. And there's so many of these cases when you start to delve into them. And I've got a couple in the book there which are very, very interesting. One who's a guy I know who's a professor of music now, and he went back to a life in the jazz era, and he was actually killed in an accident. He was a musician by the name of Frank Teschemacher, who worked back in the Chicago and the jazz era, and he died in a car accident at a very young age. So there's a fascinating story. So now he's come back again, brought a lot of those musical abilities and the same interest that he had. And all this lifetime, what has his musical interest been ever since a kid? Jazz music from the 20s and 30s. So there you go. There are so many of these stories that are there. And when you start delving into the area of past life investigation, what we can learn, what we can bring back, what we can accomplish, and where we can move on from is an individual thing, obviously. But we can bring back messages. And I believe there were a couple of messages there that I was able to bring back, and hopefully that might be picked up to get the thoughts going out there. But another one that Pete did with me was a life in another world. And I wanted to talk very briefly about this because we don't all just keep on coming back. It's not a sort of a roundabout on the earth. Peter has done hundreds and hundreds of regressions. And when I asked him about life on other worlds and reincarnation on this planet, I said, how many people? He said, there's over 90% of everybody that he has ever regressed that has had a life on another world. In fact, it's less than 10% of people who haven't had a life on another world. So think about that. And we try to believe what people write and say, oh no, there's nothing out there. It's just a big empty void. They're just pretty little lights in the sky. Oh, really? How arrogant can we be if there's no life on other worlds and in other dimensions? We live in a third dimensional reality here on Earth, as many of you probably know. And there is no time involved in a third dimensional reality. Once we move on to other dimensions, we move into the fourth dimension. There's time in the third dimension, I should say. There's no time in the fourth dimension. Then we move on, and we look at the string theory. The string theory represents growth into other dimensions and accepts anything up to 10 dimensions. Well, other scientific research now in the quantum area is talking about anything up to 26 different dimensions. So we've got a lot of different places that we can access lives, and many different worlds and many different planets. I firmly believe, in my own research, and I've confirmed this with quite a few other researchers, that, for instance, the planets that we look at in our own solar system that we regard as uninhabitable, they're uninhabitable in a third dimensional reality, but they are inhabited in another dimension. So there are life forms. They're not human life forms necessarily, but they are life forms because it's a different dimension. We've got life forms that are pure energy. There are life forms that are flame. So, I mean, yet you could have a life on Venus, for instance, and be pure flame, pure energy. And this is an area when you start getting into quantum consciousness that becomes really fascinating, really wonderful. The other thing about is parallel dimensions that we have, and Pete's regressed a couple of people there who've had lives in parallel dimensions, and pardon me, and on a couple of very limited occasions, two people that he regressed had lives where they had split their soul energy. So part of their soul energy was having a lifetime on Earth. Another part of their life energy, or their soul energy, was having life on another world. And in another case was having a life, this woman was having a life in America, and her other soul energy was having a life in China. But 20% of that energy was still back up in the world of spirit as the higher self. So all of these things, there are just so many aspects of life that we're coming down to explore each lifetime. We're coming to explore new opportunities, new ways of understanding what life is all about, understanding humanity, and understanding, of course, ourselves. And basically, that's what it's all about. Anyway, I didn't necessarily think that I'd had another life on another planet, but Pete put me through another regression. And this was interesting because the first two he did with Kassos in Greece and Jack in the Civil War, well, when I was living in Mullumbimby, and I had a healing room there, and I was able to use the healing room for using the regressions. But I moved back to Sydney by the time I was unable to, no, Peter had gone back to Melbourne, that's what it was. I was still in Mullumbimby. But so we decided to have one more session, and we did it on Zoom, funnily enough. And Peter said, I don't like doing it on Zoom. I don't really feel that it's going to be successful. Anyway, it was a raging success, because as soon as Pete says something to me, bang, I just go, whoom, out like that. Because he's put post-hypnotic suggestions in there, and with a few trigger words, I'm just down, out, and whoa, in another dimension. So it took me out into this lifetime to see it was just another exploration. All of a sudden, I saw myself as a kind of bird, which was quite weird. And it was like a bird's eye view, and I was flying over this land somewhere. And I realized I was not a bird, but it was like a bird's eye view. And it was essentially a kind of spacecraft, if you like. Anyway, to cut a long story short here, we flew over this land. I don't know whether any of you have been to Egypt or not, but as you go down the Nile, either side of the Nile, there's this green strip. There's the blue strip of the Nile. Either side, you've got a strip of verdant growth. And after that, it's like there's a knife gone down, like that, and it goes straight into the desert. That was what it was like in this particular world that we're visiting, except there was no real growth around, but it was in a city. And all of a sudden, there was desert right up to, and bang, all of a sudden, the city walls in the desert. So we flew, the craft anyway, flew over and investigated this world. And Peter was able to then communicate with me in this lifetime. And I turned out to have a name of Leda, Leda. And I was from another civilization, and they were looking out all over. I was just one of these explorers that was sent out to examine various civilizations to learn what they could come back to solve some problems in their own world that were going on at the time. And this particular world, this particular city anyway, was dead. Absolutely. There was nobody there. It was totally abandoned. And my feeling that I got, and this is, as I said before, all recorded, all there, and the feeling I had was, it was basically, there was no love there. The city died because there was no love. It was a total technical city. They had given themselves over to a technological lifestyle. Everything was technology. And humanity, or whatever we would regard as humanity, had disappeared, and there was no love. And that was what Leda found. And he was saying, or she was saying, we don't know whether Leda was male or female, doesn't matter. Leda was saying that this is where their world is heading to at the present stage. And they're sending out these craft and various other explorers to find out, bring information back so they can try and work on their own civilization to stop what had happened in this particular world. So quite fascinating, because then when I listened to this afterwards, and Leda then connected, and Pete got him or her through to my soul, and it connected. So we had this wonderful conversation. I won't go into it here because it does go on a little bit, but quite amazing, and talking about that lack of love and how important it is. It's the key of the universe, basically. And Leda had agreed to come in and sort of keep some kind of a deeper connection with me. Now, I haven't felt this in my conscious mind, so maybe it's happening at a subconscious level, but it was quite fascinating. And of course, afterwards, when I look back and I'm writing this book, I'm thinking, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Because what are we doing on our planet right now? We are giving ourselves away more and more and more to technology. You know, you walk down the street, everybody's walking around with a phone stuck up their nostril. Everybody's sitting in front of screens now, but technology is starting to dominate. And now we're talking about artificial intelligence taking over. What is going to happen with artificial intelligence? Where are we going? Are we heading in the same direction? Is this some kind of a warning from the universe that I've picked up and been able to put into my book? I don't know. I'm not saying that humanity should do what I say, but it's just a very, very strong observation there. So these are some of the things that I've been able to write about. There are so many more. I'm not sure. Yes, I better wrap up in a couple of minutes. I'll wrap up with a story that happened last year. And it illustrates, I think, a really strong way of what we can learn from a past life and how it can help us in this particular lifetime. I went down to a seminar that Anna, my partner, and I went down to a seminar in Melbourne that Pete Smith was running at the beginning of last year. And it was about quantum consciousness, a weekend seminar, which was absolutely fascinating. And on the Saturday night, I had a problem for a little while, and I had this hand that was sort of left hand that was shaking a lot, and I couldn't pick up a cup of tea or anything like that with it because it would end up all over the floor or the table or wherever. It's very embarrassing. So I was talking to Pete about this, and he said, "Okay, stay back after everybody leaves, and we'll do a quick session." So I said, "Oh, okay, right." So everybody left on the Saturday night, and we were all going out to dinner anyway, Pete and his partner and Anne and myself. And so they just went over in the corner of the girls and had a talk while Pete put me into another regression. And of course, as soon as he only got to start saying the key words, and I'm gone. And it was fascinating when it came back that I went back to a life as a young man in Tudor times in England, and his name was Thomas. And Thomas was applying for a job in the court. He was as a clerk, and he went along to apply for this job, or this position, I should say, with a guy called Sir Francis Walsingham. Now, that name didn't mean anything to me at the time, but Sir Francis Walsingham. So he went along there, and he was so nervous, young Thomas. He was so, because it meant so much to him to get this job, because it was a foot in the door, as it were, in those days. Anyway, he went in there, and he was able to conquer his nerves, and he ended up getting the job. So then Peter took him down into another little chat there and asked why he had this shaking hand. What happened? And talking to his soul, or my soul, as Thomas. And apparently young Thomas had had an accident where a carriage had run over his left hand and had left it. Obviously, it didn't smash it to pieces, but it had left it, so that there was always this trembling routine. So I was able to then come out of this, and then when it explained to what this soul or the shaking business was about. And when I came out of the regression, we picked up the old phone and said, Sir Francis Walsingham. Okay, what is it? Sir Francis Walsingham turned out to be Queen Elizabeth I's spy master. So he was a pretty heavy sort of a character. And here's me as young Thomas applying for a job as a lowly clerk. No wonder I was so nervous and I was trembling like a leaf. So anyway, but it worked out that ever since I've been able to understand why I have this shaking left hand, I'm now able to drink a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or pick up a glass and not spill it everywhere. Now, occasionally I still have a few shakes. So I've learned now to address the whole thing and say, Thomas, stop shaking. And immediately it stops shaking. So it's the key word. So good old Thomas, he's there. He's only a young bloke. I don't know whatever happened to him, but it explains something to me as to why I've been having this shaking hand routine, which had been getting worse over 2 or 3 years. It started off as just annoying, but it's still there. It returns, but I now know how to deal with it. But it's not there all the time, whereas it was before. So it explained it to me, and explains how perhaps we can look at our health things, our lifetime, or our various problems that we may have in this lifetime, and to be able to look and see what we can do about it. So that's what I'm talking about, the relevance of past lives in today's troubled world. So if we're having problems about fear, about all sorts of things because of the current situation, then maybe we can find out what it is in a past that created that fear and learn to deal with it, not only in today's current circumstances, but anything in our lifetimes. And I think that's the greatest gift that we can, because we're giving the gift to ourselves from ourselves. And you can't get better than that. Thank you. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, I even put up your Joy of Living book because I like the tag Postponing the Afterlife. I thought that was very good.
Well, I wanted to call it Postponing the Afterlife, and the publishers, much to my chagrin, said, no, we don't want to call it that. We'll call it The Joy of Living. And as such, there's another book called The Joy of Living, which came out a year or two before that. So unfortunately, it affected the impact of that book, which, anyway, that's life, isn't it? But no,
Yeah,
Past
okay.
Lives Unveiled, that's the current one, and it is available online. Right, Barry. Yeah.
Okay, so that's Barry's book, the latest one, Past Lives Unveiled, if you'd like to get a copy of that. So thanks everyone for coming along. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you again, Barry, for spending your time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot for being a great audience.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Barry.